An update on a key starting offensive lineman for the Tigers. Could they be without him against Alabama? We've got an update. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, please smash that like button. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. College football playoff bubble watch. We've got LSU CFP odds, which have been updated after, of course, LSU lost to Texas A&M this past weekend. It's the coaching carousel season already. Could a couple of LSU assistants be on the short list for the Rice job? We'll get into that here in just a quick second. But Tigers were on the practice field on Tuesday, and Brian Kelly met with reporters afterwards, and he did give an update on Garrett Dellinger. So if you were watching the game Saturday against Texas A&M late in the second quarter, Garrett Dellinger, LSU senior starting left guard, has been a 4-year starter for the Tigers, really all across the line. But since Brian Kelly's been here and made the decision in 2022 to start Campbell and Jones at the tackle spots, and of course, at that time, they made the Charles Turner the switch at center. Dellinger moved to left guard, where he's been ever since now for the better part of 3 years. And Dellinger went out with what was very clearly a lower leg, foot, ankle type injury, did not return. Paul Mabenga replaced Garrett Dellinger. The update from Brian Kelly on Tuesday is that Dellinger has a high ankle sprain. So didn't offer anything more other than to say it's a high ankle sprain, and this will be a rest week for Garrett Dellinger. Now, we know there's different degrees of severity for ankle sprains, and I'm not an orthopedist. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you all that, but you're a sports fan and you understand there's varying degrees. We've seen things as severe as like what Tua had several years ago in 2019, where he had that tightrope procedure and played against LSU. And then we've seen instances where guys have that ankle sprain, they get it taped up and they play through it. The one thing we know about an ankle injury is it never heals unless there's time. So it's not going to get all the way better. And that's something Garrett Dellinger, unfortunately, is going to have to deal with for the remainder of this season. That's just the nature of that injury, which we know. One thing that I have learned over time with an ankle injury like that is just the difference between how an ankle injury affects, say, an interior lineman and how it affects a receiver or a running back, so to speak. An interior lineman, you can tape that thing up, you can immobilize it, and they can still be effective. It's much more difficult when you're talking about a perimeter player where you have to stop and cut. For example, if you're a receiver and you're going to run a 10-yard cross where it's a dead sprint to 10 yards and you're making stopping on a dime, making the 90-degree turn, well, you have to plant and change direction without losing speed and pivot. Yes, you're putting much more stress on your ankles than you are just playing in a phone booth like an offensive guard would. So maybe a little more reason to believe it'll work. I'll give you this example as well. If you remember the UCLA game, there was a hold your breath moment in that UCLA game where Emory Jones had someone fall on his foot and he twisted his ankle, left the game, and then returned. Well, they just heavily taped that thing up and got him back in there. They just immobilized the ankle and he was able to play. So if it were a different position, like think about Trey Harris, the wide receiver at Ole Miss, how badly that ankle affected him to where he couldn't go in the second half against LSU and didn't play for Ole Miss this past weekend. It's just something to keep an eye on, but it's something that for that position in particular, maybe Garrett Dellinger can overcome it. Now, Brian Kelly was asked point blank if Dellinger leaving affected LSU's running game.
He's the starter, but one guy, going down did not affect the running game to the level that it did. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, there are bits and pieces to it. And, we did not win some individual matchups. We made some mistakes uncharacteristically from some other guys that are on the offensive line. And quite frankly, we made some choices to run into boxes that were not conducive, and we should have been doing some other things. So it was a little bit of all those things. And even with that, and we don't want to live that way, it's still going to come down to the inability to take care of the football and the inability to slow them down in the second half, with the quarterback, the new quarterback coming in. That really was the difference.
You said a lot there, but it's something you think you can overcome. Now, for what it's worth, Paul Mabenga replaced Garrett Dellinger in that game, and in the Texas A&M game, Paul Mabenga overall graded out at a 51.1 on Pro Football Focus. His pass block was a 74.5. His run block, 38.3. Now, let me illustrate what I don't want to throw a bunch of numbers at you because I know sometimes numbers are confusing for people and you're not going to memorize it. So I don't want you to memorize this. I'm just going to illustrate it for you. So remember, I just told you Paul Mabenga, his run block grade against Texas A&M was a 38 at Pro Football Focus. Garrett Dellinger's season run block grade is a 72.3. It's the second highest on the team behind only Will Campbell, who's a 72.9. So your two highest graded run blocking linemen, Campbell 72.9, Dellinger 72.3. Yeah, it mattered. By the way, the next highest is Miles Frazier at 57. Emory Jones 51, DJ Chester 50.2. So yeah, Garrett Dellinger is arguably your best run blocking offensive lineman. By the way, your overall grades at Pro Football Focus for your offensive lineman on the entire season, Garrett Dellinger's overall grade is 76.4, the highest among your starters. Next is Will Campbell at 72.7, then Miles Frazier at 66.9, Emory Jones at 55.6, DJ Chester at 49.7. So yes, Garrett Dellinger is your highest graded offensive lineman. Losing him stings. Putting Paul Mabenga in his place is a dramatic drop-off. Let's hope with 2 weeks to heal, Garrett Dellinger can be good enough and healthy enough to get out there and give it a go against Alabama. Brian Kelly also met with reporters and talked about a little bit about what they worked on Tuesday when they were back on the practice field. It was asked, like, were you looking more at what went wrong in the A&M game? Were you trying to fix it? What did you do on Tuesday?
And then we went to work on some of the things that we believe we need to get better at on both sides of the ball. And so it's a little bit of, here are the things you did really well. Here are the things we got to work on. And then, let's get some of the young guys some work. We had a little bit of a scrimmage with the young guys. So that was the focus today.
One more, and I hope I promise, that this will be the last time we have to talk about the Texas A&M game. Brian Kelly was asked a follow-up about Greg Penn's comments. And if you've been here, you know what I'm talking about, but I'll just very quickly remind you, LSU linebacker Greg Penn was asked after the game about Marcel Reed, the Texas A&M quarterback coming in, and he said point blank, we didn't really prepare for it. Caught us off guard. We didn't think he was coming into the game. Brian Kelly sort of distanced himself from those comments Saturday after the game. Well, he was asked point blank about Greg Penn's comments on Tuesday, and this is what Brian Kelly said.
Yeah, I don't know that Greg was referring to the fact that we weren't prepared. You don't run a defense expecting the number 2 quarterback to come in. We've prepared for that kind of offense. Everybody runs what they ran. They ran zone read and they ran bash. And we saw that last week. We saw it. We've seen it every week. And so, again, those are things that we just didn't execute as well. And we prepared for Connor to play. And so a lot of the reps were focused on the offense that Connor is part of. But throughout camp, throughout spring ball, throughout the course of the season, we have a defense and a structure that stops quarterback runs, that stops read option, because you have to. And so the fact of the matter is we just didn't execute it as well. And that's the fact of the matter.
So it's like if you shoot 3-pointers in fall camp and you shoot 3-pointers in spring practice and you shoot 3-pointers all throughout the season, and then you take a week where you don't shoot 3-pointers at all, and then all of a sudden the game changes and you have to shoot nothing but threes and you haven't taken shots all week and you don't shoot well. You didn't prepare for it. You have a defense. You have that structure, no doubt, but you didn't prepare for it very clearly. Hopefully that's the last we have to say about it. And hopefully everybody learned a very, very valuable lesson therein. Okay. It is Locked On LSU. From the current to the future a bit, a couple of LSU assistants being mentioned for the Rice job. I want to talk about that. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Man, I love telling you about Gametime. It is my favorite ticketing app. I'm telling you what, go check out Gametime. You want to be in that number when LSU hosts Alabama a week from Saturday. Just download the Gametime app, and they'll get you there, man. I love the Gametime picks. Component curation makes it easier so you can save more on sports and concerts and comedy and theater and everything. What I love the most is the all-in pricing. I've told you this story before, but several years back, my wife Erica and I were up in New York. We're going to go catch a Knicks game. I remember it was a very impromptu thing. Got on one of the ticketing apps, bought tickets, and I thought I knew the price I was going to pay. By the time I got to checkout, the price was nearly double what the price I thought I was going to pay. Well, with all-in pricing at Gametime, you don't have to worry about it. Now, you got to turn that feature on, but you toggle over it, it'll show you the final price. So there's no surprise upticks or upcharges at checkout. It's all there at Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. It's getting to be coaching carousel season because coaches are going to be fired, and that means other coaches are going to be interested in jobs. And to be very clear, if there was a job open and they started, a school started to speak with current coaches that are working another job, that would be tampering. You can't do that. But you can talk to a coach's representative, i.e. his agent. And it was interesting because on Sunday, Rice fired Mike Bloomgren. A little interesting because Rice isn't a program that's traditionally had a ton of success, but they did play in 2 bowl games under Bloomgren, but started this year 2-6, and so they canned him on Sunday. And Tommy McClelland is the athletic director and kind of has his chance now to sort of put a stamp on a program. And it was interesting because CBS Sports took a look at a list of potential candidates for the Rice job and mentioned not 1 but 2 LSU assistants for that job. And no, not Joe Sloan, and no, not Blake Baker, but Cortez Hankton and Slade Nagel. And I think, by the way, either one of those guys would be a really good fit for Rice. Now, let me just first address the Sloan Baker piece of this, because I think we're going to hear those 2 names, not only this year, but in years moving forward, up for head coaching jobs, the same way we got used to with Blake Baker. It's very hard and almost unprecedented to go from a position coaching job to a Power 5 head coaching job. What you do see are high-level Power 5 coordinators become Power 5 head coaches. Will Muschamp, his first job was Florida. Kirby Smart, first job was Georgia. Dave Aranda, his first job was Baylor. That is not altogether uncommon. Jeremy Pruitt's first job was Tennessee, head coaching job. So you see that, right? You do see coordinators, high-level coordinators, get premier head coaching jobs. That happened. Lincoln Riley went from Oklahoma OC to Oklahoma head coach. It is rare for a position coach to get a Power 5 head coaching job. Usually the position coach that wants to be a head coach has to be a lower level head coach, crush it, and then get the better job. While I understand Cortez Hankton is a co-offensive coordinator in title, Joe Sloan is calling this offense, calling the plays, and he is the offensive coordinator and play caller. But for Hankton, you understand, like, he's being paid like a coordinator, and he should be because he's fantastic. Just look at the job he's done recruiting and developing receivers at that position. He's also got an NFL pedigree. He's coached in the Ivy League. He's coached at Vanderbilt. He's coached at Georgia. He's coached at LSU. So he's coached in the SEC, outside of the SEC, places where you have tons of resources, places where you don't have tons of resources, places where you have expectations and not. Hankton is going to be a head coach, and I think going to be a really good head coach as well. He's from New Orleans, there in St. Aug. He coached in Texas as well. So this is a guy who will get, again, during his time, he played at Texas Southern, so that's in Houston. So Rice is obviously in Houston, so there's ties there. There's a lot of reasons why Hankton would make sense for that job. And as for Slade Nagel, that's another one where you're talking about a guy who has great ties to Louisiana from Northwestern State, spent 1 year at LSU in 2009. He bounced around a little bit after that. He most recently was at Tulane. He was the interim head coach at Tulane when Willie Fritz left for the Houston job and actually worked with Tommy McClelland, the Rice AD, at McNeese State. So there's familiarity there as well. That was from 2008 to 2013. So there's a lot of synergies with both of these guys that would make sense. And remember also, Slade Nagel was at Tulane, which is in the American Athletic Conference, and Rice is in the AAC. So there's even familiarity with the league. So a lot of that makes sense. And I think it would be a really good opportunity for either guy if they would get it. It's a guy like Ed Ogeron, who was a position coach and then got a head coaching job in the SEC at Ole Miss, or Sam Pittman, who was an offensive line coach who became the head coach at Arkansas. Those are sort of situational, and those are outliers. Those are certainly uncommon. So it's not impossible to think those guys could get a P5 head coaching job, but more than likely, you're going to take a job like Rice, hopefully crush it, and then get a better opportunity. But all that remains to be seen. I also like Hankton's championship pedigree at Georgia and now at LSU. So there's a lot to like. And the other piece of it, too, is Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly has sort of developed this coaching tree over time. We've talked a lot about the defensive coordinators, from Clark Lee, who's the head coach at Vanderbilt, Marcus Freeman, who Brian Kelly hired at Notre Dame, is now the head coach at Notre Dame. That's another example of a guy who was a high-level coordinator who became a high-level head coach, skipping sort of the mid-level head coaching job. Butch Jones was on Brian Kelly's staff, took over for him at Cincinnati. Even guys like Robert Saleh, who just got fired by the Jets, but Robert Saleh was with Brian Kelly early in his career. Matt LaFleur of the Green Bay Packers was with Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. So there's a lot of coaches who have had their touch points with Brian Kelly who have gone on to be great head coaches, and maybe these two guys will be next. I fully expect that Blake Baker and Joe Sloan are going to get head coaching jobs, but I would suggest for both of them that they'd be more patient. Now, Baker is interesting because he moved back to Louisiana. His wife is from Mandeville. She played soccer at LSU. Her family lives here as well, so they have help with their kids and want to be close to family. And he's being paid $2 million a year. It's hard to imagine Blake Baker jumping, unless if it's one of those you don't say no to this type jobs. And I don't know if that's coming after this year. But his time in Baton Rouge may be somewhat short-lived, but I think he'll certainly be back in 2025. But we'll keep an eye on all of it. All these coaches have upward trajectory aspirations, ascending aspirations to be head coaches. And you want that for them, because while it's disappointing to have turnover on your staff, that's also a sign that you're doing something well when other teams want to take a part of your culture, a part of what is working. You just have to be confident in the head coach and his ability to replace those components when you lose them on your staff. And maybe you'll have to do it with one of these guys in the Rice job. We'll keep an eye on it as we get closer. Okay, it is Locked on LSU, your team every day. We'll wrap up with a little bubble watch for the college football playoff and the latest odds for LSU in the college football playoff as well. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. LSU lost its margin, no doubt, on Saturday with the loss to Texas A&M. And as disappointing as that is, all is not entirely lost. I do like to look at Heather Dinich's playoff bubble watch every week. It's effectively, for football, the bracketology that Joe Lunardi does for basketball. And Heather does a really good job with it. And just for an instance, this is not her projection. This is a projection. Let me rephrase that. It's not a projection based on what she thinks will happen at the remainder of the season. It's a projection based on what we know right now. Okay, given the evidence we have right now, the results right now, how would the college football playoff look? So right now, Oregon, Georgia, Miami, BYU, those would be your top four seeds. Remember, we've got to kind of condition ourselves to this. It's no longer about the rankings, they're seedings. So the college football playoff will rank the teams 1 through 12, but the top 4 conference champions get the top 4 seeds and a bye. So BYU, for example, isn't going to be a top 4 team in the country in these rankings, but if they win the Big 12, they would be a top 4 seed with a bye. Does that make sense? Okay, like for example, Notre Dame does not play in a conference. Notre Dame could be undefeated and the number 1 ranked team. The highest they could be seeded is 5 because the top 4 seeds and the byes go to the highest ranked conference champions. Notre Dame is effectively ineligible for that. The highest they could ever be seeded is 5. Okay, so Oregon, Georgia, Miami, BYU, the champs of the Big 10, SEC, ACC, Big 12, as projected here. Then your on-campus games, number 5, Penn State against number 12, Tennessee. Number 8, Texas A&M against number 9, Indiana. Number 6, Ohio State against number 11, Clemson. And number 7, Texas against number 10, Boise State. So you got Boise State there, not even the 12th seed there, but the 10 higher even than the last team in. For what it's worth, obviously with LSU's loss, they did fall out of this bracketology, these projections, and they don't even have LSU among the first 4 out, but the next 4 out. The first 4 out are Notre Dame, Iowa State, Kansas State, and Alabama. The next 4 out, Ole Miss, LSU, Pitt at 7-0, and SMU. So it is interesting to see because obviously LSU, Ole Miss, and Alabama are all at 6-2. But the way she has them ranked right now is Bama, Ole Miss, and LSU. Bama being the highest makes sense with the same record because they have the best win, which is Georgia. Although they have 2 disappointing losses, those losses continue to look better. Ole Miss right now will have an opportunity when they play Georgia at home, but clearly LSU with a head-to-head against Ole Miss would probably win out. And Heather Dinich actually makes that point. She notes, if LSU and Ole Miss both finish with 2 losses, the Tigers' head-to-head win against the Rebels could be the difference in the committee meeting room. Plus, losing in Vegas to Southern Cal could wind up looking better than Ole Miss losing at home to Kentucky. The best way to say it is this. Because LSU has a win over Ole Miss and they play Alabama, if you win out and you go 10-2, you're going to be in the field because ultimately you're going to see other teams play head-to-head and there's going to be more losses and more carnage. Tennessee has to play Georgia. Ole Miss has to play Georgia. Texas has to play Texas A&M. So you're going to see more of this. Obviously, Alabama plays LSU. If LSU wins out, there is going to be very natural attrition that's going to happen in the SEC, and it's going to lend LSU to being in. But you got to win out. And for what it's worth, right now, the ESPN FPI has updated the college football playoff odds. And I was kind of taking a look at it from the perspective of the SEC teams that have college football playoff odds right now. And for what it's worth, no surprise here, but Georgia and Texas currently have the best odds. Georgia at 84%, Texas at 75.8%, followed by Tennessee at 68%, Alabama at 52%, Texas A&M at 46%, big drop off to LSU at 21.9%, then Ole Miss at 18.7%. So Georgia, Texas are virtual locks. Now Georgia still has to play Ole Miss, and Georgia still has to play Tennessee. So they got some tough games still ahead. Texas still has to play Texas A&M on the road. Tennessee has to play Georgia. So I guess here's how I would say it. If you're looking through the LSU lens and you want to know what to cheer for, you kind of want Georgia to go do damage. You want Georgia to beat Tennessee and you want Georgia to beat Ole Miss. Because if Georgia beats Tennessee and hands them another loss, and if Georgia beats Ole Miss and hands them their 3rd loss, and then LSU beats Alabama, that hands Alabama their 3rd loss, then you're in a situation where it's probably Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M, and LSU. You'd be 4th in the league, provided Texas A&M continues to win or only has 1 loss. You'd be 4th, and it's a question of does the SEC get 4 in? And I think 10-2 LSU would have an attractive enough resume to get them there. So we'll continue to follow it. There's so much football left to play. I mean, you have 5 weeks of the regular season and the conference championship weekend. So you have 6 more weeks of football. There's going to be games and upsets, and we'll figure it all out. And the path will become clearer as it tends to do so as we get closer. But in the meantime, LSU's got to use these 2 weeks to get set for Jalen Milroe, for Alabama, and to win a game on your home field. Eliminate Alabama and keep your playoff heartbeat alive. We'll see if they can do it. We'll be right here covering it every single day. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day here on Locked On LSU. And now for your second listen, you go check out Locked On SEC with our guy, Chris Gordy, LSU alum. You can find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, if you are listening on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.